Hello and welcome to the 20th edition of Arts First, the podcast that stands for freedom of expression in the arts and art for art's sake. I'm Niall Crowley. The relationship between art and science is a long and interesting one, and certainly not something we've covered here before. Think, for example, of the influence of geometry on the development of perspective in Renaissance painting, or how the impact of Einstein's theories of time and space had a huge influence on early 20th century painting, say Cubism, classical music, film and literature. Conversely, you could say that the work of the human imagination and our creativity have fueled much of scientific inquiry. An exhibition currently on show at Nottingham University's Lakeside Art Centre seeks to unite art and science in a captivating exploration, to use their words, of the strange and mysterious quantum universe. Knots-based author and critic Jo Herlihy recently reviewed the show for arts journal Left Lion, and as a highly valued friend of Arts First, Jo offered to track down the exhibition's co-curator, Dr. Ulrike Kuchner, and hopefully dig a little deeper and find out what the show is all about. We're thrilled then that she kindly agreed to speak to us. And so here is Jo Herlihy in conversation with Dr. Kuchner talking about Cosmic Titans. We hope you enjoy it.
Cosmic Titans, ArtScience and Quantum Universe is an exhibition currently at Nottingham University, Djanogly Art Gallery, Lakeside. It opened at the end of January and runs until the end of April. It's a multimedia exploration of how we can attempt to understand aspects of the universe, so small, so vast, so distant, that they are beyond the comprehension of our five senses. The exhibition was quite a few years in the making, and it coincides with 100 years of quantum mechanics. Dr. Ulrike Kuchner, who's with me today, is a senior research fellow at the School of Physics and Astronomy at Nottingham University. And she is one of two curators of this very ambitious exhibition. With her co-creator, Professor Silke Weinfurtner, Dr. Kuchner founded the ARTlab, the university's first ArtScience experimentation space. The curators brought together 9 artists to work in residence, alongside quantum scientists, particle physicists and astrophysicists, investigating the early universe and black holes. Dr. Kuchner agreed to speak to me about the exhibition and the ideas it plays with. What I've tried to do is use a number of the pieces in the exhibition as an opener to most of the questions to give listeners a bit of an idea of what the exhibition is made up of. And I've put images where they're available on the Substack. There's been a very interesting programme of lectures that have accompanied the exhibition, along with some sound files explaining some of the artworks. So there's lots of material, lots of ideas, lots to dig into. So the first thing really is if you could introduce yourself.
Absolutely. I am Ulrike Kuchner. I am based here at the University of Nottingham in physics and astronomy. I am an astrophysicist, but also an artist, a curator, and a researcher of interdisciplinarity. I studied both astrophysics and fine arts at 2 universities in Vienna. Simultaneously, at the beginning, I really wanted to separate the two. I thought Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I could do one, and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the other. But when it came to my master's thesis, which were roughly around the same time, it became obvious that I needed to combine them. That's when my explorations into art science started. After my degrees finished and I started my PhD in astrophysics, I continued to make art, exhibit art, and work in this space in between. After years of doing this independently, I wanted to encourage and enable other artists and scientists to work together, and then finally to research and study this collaboration and how we can improve it and what the benefits are.
Fantastic. And then on the exhibition name itself, which I loved, it's Cosmic Titans, Art, Science and Quantum Universe. I think because the cosmic titans bit obviously refers to both the phenomena in space, but it also links us back to the titans of Greek mythology, which the naming of the planetary system so bound up with. Can you just tell us, by way of introduction to the themes of the exhibition, how the name came about, some of the key moments of the inception of the exhibition?
So it's important to say that the exhibition is one outcome of this 2-year-long process of creating the ARTlab and inviting artists into the scientific research environments. As a curator and integrator between art and science, it was really important for me that art and science are meeting each other on equal footing so that there are mutual benefits. And that is immediately obvious in the subtitle, Art and Science. I am not introducing a hierarchy. It's important to say that. The cosmic titans bit, we had that first. Of course, they were the children of sky and earth. They're often depicted as beings associated with natural forces and the cosmic order. We also often think of it as something massive, as energetic. And because the research group where the ARTlab is situated in studies black holes and the early universe, so the origin of everything, felt really fitting. We're also celebrating 100 years of quantum, and quantum physics is really the underlying principle to the entire universe. So we wanted to make it obvious that we're talking about this weird quantum world that enables everything that we are. In the end, we came up with Cosmic Titans, Art, Science, and the Quantum Universe.
How did the coming together with the artists work, and how did you bring those people together? It sounds like a physical space that you've got in terms of an arts lab. How does it work?
Yeah, that's right. We have a physical space. We're lucky to have a room in the department in the School of Physics and Astronomy, which is unusual. So we're bringing the arts right into the science. So we were lucky to generate funding to invite artists to come in over a 2-year period. We invited people that I've worked with before. I've curated and collaborated and enabled art science collaborations for about 10 years now. We started with a focus group meeting where we brought together people from the arts, from the sciences, from the university, where we really developed what we wanted the ARTlab to be. Some of these artists made an immediate impression on the researchers. So one of the reasons why we wanted such a diversity is because it is a test lab, a living lab, researching how art science collaborations work and how we can improve them because they are challenging. And so having a diversity of different modes of working was crucial so we could test and understand them. And so creating artwork and artistic research and artistic practice takes time. And this is all something we know from research, that creating collaborative conditions, especially across the disciplines that are so distant, requires time, requires listening to one another, talking about the misconceptions and the biases and judgments we might have.
Lovely. Following on the whole sort of art science element emphasised within the title, I thought the Conrad Shawcross is quite a nice piece to use as a bit of a metaphor. He built a kinetic structure, which is the first piece you see when you go into the exhibition. And it plays out the collision of 2 spinning bronze bells circulating in a dome, with sensors capturing the movement on an adjacent screen. The movement, light and sound of this structure as it's unfolding. And it's the cosmic dance that occurs when 2 black holes converge. And that is what's known as ringdown. And so from an art and science perspective, in one sense, those spheres potentially represent for us either things that are distant or they come together over time. I wasn't aware myself of the different debates that have happened between art and science, but I was alerted to the lecture that C.P. Snow gave back in 1959, where he locates the separation between art and science, which in his reading starts after the First World War and becomes very apparent in the 1930s. But obviously something that continues today. I was chatting to my daughter's friend, and she said that when she tried to do her options only 10 years ago, she wasn't allowed to do both biology and art. Even in a contemporary sense, there's quite a clear separation, and her teachers couldn't understand why she'd want to do both subjects. So time's moved on, and I'm just wondering why you thought that bringing together art and science was particularly important, and any observations in terms of what's new about the discussion.
Yeah, it's really wonderful that you find that within Ringdown. You're right that Ringdown actually relates to the merger of black holes, but I really love that you also see all of that in there. And you're right that at first glance, art and science seem like opposite ends of a spectrum, but they are both ways to explore, to understand, to communicate the world around us. And they're just doing this through different perspectives and different lenses. I often see the most beneficial, the most obvious reasons for doing this is that art science, either individually or in collaboration, combines these moments of divergence where you have many new ideas and many new questions. You go wide. That's something that requires imagination. It's something that the arts are trained in. And then you converge your thinking towards decision-making that requires logic and going deep. And that's what the sciences are amazingly well trained in. So together, that's one definition of what creativity is. It requires the divergence and the convergence. So it is to me so obvious that combining the disciplines that are well trained in them is a no-brainer. This is what is required for new ideas, for innovation. However, as you said, in our contemporary education system and research system, they are divided. They are in different departments, in different buildings, but it's all just one brain. There are many ways of converging towards an understanding. The ARTlab is this test bed for how we can foster that in our current environment, where these different disciplines have methods and skills that are almost sacred to them. The defined outcome of 21st century learning is actually creativity. So it's baffling to me that there aren't initiatives already very early that make it clear that combining them can propel us forward. Art and science may have different roles in the human experience. They express themselves differently. They have distinct methods, rules, and goals, but they share curiosity, creativity, and imagination. The process of discovery starts at a very similar place. It's a personal moment of intuition and aha. And that is, I think, something that we can focus on when we bring artists and scientists together. Then we can feed off each other's curiosities, skills, and ways of working. It's challenging to bring them together. This is well researched, and I've experienced this over the course of my decades of doing this. Because there are different languages, different understandings, different methods. Bringing them together requires the patience, requires the wish to work together, and finding commonalities and moments where you can experience and explore something together is really crucial there.
When I came to the first night, there was excitement in people talking about how some of the pieces were developed. And it does lead on to the question where I was trying to weigh up the difference in the outcome of the art pieces around beauty and utility. I was trying to think about the exhibition coming at it from an artistic perspective and whether or not the art objects stand on their own as a sort of judgment. So I was trying to approach the exhibition from that perspective. And I thought there was a couple of pieces that give a bit of a contrast for the listeners. So there's one by Alistair McClymont called An Early Universe. And in that, he gives us something that I think is very beautiful. What he constructs is a piece that shows, and I'm going to do this bit in inverted commas because it took me quite a while to pin down exactly what his piece was doing, is the pattern of the waves of the surface of vibrated water, which he used to conjecture the dynamics of the universe in the split second after the Big Bang. And there's ripples of the explosion of space that shimmer, for me, in moonlight colour, that shows a sort of chaotic beauty of the loops and waves of what is called the cosmic inflation reaction. And it's installed in a lovely, dark, tranquil space, and it almost puts you as a spectator hovering over this spectacle of the moment of creation, if you like. If you then compare that with Matthew Woodham's work, which is In that, he demonstrates how light appears at a subatomic level when it's observed as either wave or particle form. He uses the action of flipping a coin to show the differences of the conditions when that coin is flipped. In one of them, it's what we'd normally see, which is one or other side of the coin. And in the other, you see all possible trajectories at once. The machine he builds is a beautiful scientific instrument, so it's a lovely instrument in that sense, and we've seen many of those in museums. I'm just wondering if there was a tension for you in the creation of the artwork, in balancing the utility of the piece versus the beauty of the piece. I don't know whether and in what sense that was a factor in the creation of the exhibition. That sounds like maybe I've put two contrasting examples together. They may not be contrasting for you. So what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think they're not contrasting for me, but it's interesting that you see this dichotomy in the two pieces that you picked out. But I want to say that the most important aspect for me as the curator and integrator of ArtScience is that art is not perceived solely in the service of science, right? Or that reversely science isn't just the source of inspiration. While communicating beauty is a huge part of art, it shouldn't be just making science pretty or science communication. This is really important for us. And this is also a difference to some of the art coming out of art-science collaboration. One of the problems and challenges in art-science collaborations that scientists often use the art as making pretty the outcomes they have done. We know from a ton of research and from experience that that is not what the artist wants. An artist that is part of an art-science collaboration generally wants to co-create the knowledge together and not just visualize it. Having said that, Climate's piece, so that an early universe, that's actually closer to me to the utility. But you saw the beauty in it. I'll tell you why, because that's actually part of the development of an experiment right now. Alistair became a member of the research group. So he's an active participant in a lab experiment that is currently being developed. The scientists were sometimes stuck in a certain way because it's based on their conventions of this is how we've always done. Alistair started this artwork by replicating the early versions of the experiment in his studio. He changed some things based on his aesthetic understanding, based on his curiosity, based on his skills as an artistic practitioner. Alistair is very much interested in creating something beautiful as well. His ambition here is to contribute to the research and become a full member of the group. There was a back and forth. He came back with his version of the experiment to the studio. It was discussed and he joins the weekly meetings. His sculpture that you see now is beautiful, but it also had a direct impact on what happened in the research lab, the gravity laboratory that is run by Silke Weinfurtner, because they build analog simulations, analog experiments. So because we can never go to black holes or the very early universe or most places in the universe, there are different ways of dealing with that. One, which we astronomers usually do, is we take observations from telescopes of distant objects, and these are spectra or images, and we try to analyze them with our computers, or we build computer simulations. In Silke's case, they are building little experiments, analogs, tabletop experiments that have an analog to the system in our lab and the one in the universe. The water dish that is vibrating in the artwork in the early universe, the surface of the water and the waves on here are an analog to the conditions of the early universe. How from a very smooth surface, but in reality it's space, chaotic structures were formed. The mathematics behind this are the same. So we were probing something as an analog. Actually, his artwork was part of a philosophy project led by a philosopher of science here at the University of Nottingham, Lina Jansson, who studies to what extent we can actually infer something of the real universe by studying something in the lab. So it's all entangled in a philosophy question, but it has an artistic element. This artistic element directly influenced the research in the lab. So all of it is in there. The path of superdecision was a different one. Every one of them was actually unique. So superdecision is this machine that Matthew Woodham built. And it is this uber-size machine/human trying to help you make a decision. The title is combining superposition, which is a principle in quantum physics, and human decision-making. Superposition is, you can imagine that a particle is in two places at the same time, kind of like a light switch that is both on and off at the same time, and only through us observing it or measuring it does it collapse into its position. He uses this as a metaphor to our deliberation and decision-making process. The machine invites each individual to sit down and interact with the machine to help you make a really challenging decision, like should you quit your job or should you stay with your partner? It takes you through these moments where in the classical sense, there's a yes-no answer. But in the quantum sense, you can hover between all the answers. And I don't know about you, but I often decide not to decide. That is when towards the end of it, you see both decisions at the same time. You see both sides of the coins at the same time. And Matthew uses his background as a neuroscience student. Very quickly, the conversation led to the commonalities between creating art and creating scientific knowledge. And they found the commonality in this moment of uncertainty and ambiguity when you don't know the next step, or if you're going down a rabbit hole that leads to nothing, or where that leads you. There was a lot of conversation around the importance and how we deal with ambiguity. And that's what kind of kickstarted this machine that helps you making a decision. Plus the research that is very much current and ongoing about connections between what's happening in the brain during decision-making and quantum physics. The aesthetics of it are that of quantum technology. It looks like a quantum computer, but the whole experience is very theatrical. You sit down in the curtain and the machine is kind of sci-fi and blips and blobs, and it's this uber big machine. It's amazing to hear how you take this. And yesterday I was giving a tour to a public audience, and one woman told me that when she went through this process of superdecision, she felt very hopeful. That made me really happy because I recently realized that hope is related to action in contrast to just being optimistic, which is passive. So this is really beautiful to me that this artwork machine / research piece can have a direct impact to an audience member to feel hopeful and maybe feel towards making decisions.
I was interested in the question of future orientation and progress. There's a piece of work by Monica Lacasio and Daniela Brulestrada called In Begriff des Körpers, which relates to a phrase within the Einstein lecture at Nottingham University. It's about the body in space, time.
Comprehending the body.
They draw attention to the ethics. I thought it was interesting because I know in some of the lectures I've been to, ethics has been quite a big question mark about the relationship between science and ethics. So they utilise, for example, copper within sculpture drawings and plates within the exhibition. And they use copper, for example, to evoke waveforms and fluctuations in space-time. They highlight the complexities of using particular materials. So while the copper they use is essential for its conductivity, they also say that through the mining, there are social and environmental costs, especially for Indigenous communities. But they also pointed to a contradiction. It remains, however, a sustainable material, making it a vital resource for future technologies and experimentation. I also was struck by the way that C.P. Snow, in his lecture, which is available online, talked about how he thought that at the time scientists saw themselves as the ones interested in progress and future orientation. So I was wondering Is there a case sometimes to see art and science as separate, and that boundary is actually quite important to retain in some ways? Because there is a tendency towards the politicisation of both art and science. I wondered whether you were nervous about that and how that does creep into artworks, whether you think that's a problem or something you embrace.
It's a big topic. I'm not advocating for a middle ground and just going for the common denominator. That takes away the uniqueness of each discipline. But there are times when diving deep into a problem with expert domain knowledge is absolutely needed, and to communicate that with peers to push forward. But there are also times in the research process where being able to include other methods and to look beyond your horizon, say for artistic methods, to generate new ideas, to unlock possibilities, where transdisciplinarity is really key, especially in our complex global world where the questions are not answered by one path or one way of understanding. So we do need both, and we need to be comfortable with both. There are things that art can do that science can rarely do. People do things for emotional reasons. They rarely do something for scientific reasons. Climate change being one of the obvious examples. Art challenges us to take a position. It leans into the urgency of these global complex problems. As the audience member, you complete the artwork with your memories, with your emotions, with your personal context. That's why you find different things into the artworks than me or anyone else. And that's something that science rarely does. It is done and communicated in a way where it tries to strip away the personal, that it's communicated in a way so it's understood the same way for everyone. Science is not objective, even though there's this notion that it tries to be, but it is created by scientific communities and rests in the places and in the people that create it. Art often lingers in the questions, whereas science focuses on the answers. Most artworks try to raise questions that get answered by each individual based on their situated knowledge. And this is a reason, I think, why it is instrumentalized as well, because it is a very powerful tool for communicating urgency. It's no wonder that art is used for big themes. I'm more interested in the ways artists are included in the decision-making process around transition in the face of existential challenges like climate and biodiversity loss. Applied sciences and the sustainability research are much more comfortable with including art into the conversation, including the science in there and the arts. That is what will, in my opinion, propel us forward. This is often more powerful than the models and the assessments that are in the toolbox for the scientists. Monica Locasio and Daniela Bredestrada's work, so this is called, it's this phrase, German phrase, that Einstein wrote on the blackboard when he gave this lecture here in 1930, relates to how we grasp something challenging. And this can be anything from quantum mechanics to climate change. And when they, during their residency, spoke to a lot of the scientists here, they noticed the poetic language that was used. The usage of poetry and other aesthetic means fascinated them. One of the elements in the artwork is a poem based on a scientific review on dark energy, where they highlight all of these poetic words and diagrams, which look like drawings. The scientists always said, no, I'm not good at art. One of the things that the artists did was they always made them aware of the fact that they are using methods that the artists are using too. So this language was one of them. Thinking through making and doing, thinking through art and design. They also locate the piece in the very hyper-local history of Nottingham, so you can see the lace-making industry, the patterns that are sent to the looms for their creations that look just like the patterns that we have in order to understand space-time. They used wool that was donated by the Framework Knitters Museum here to hand crochet big nets, stitch by stitch, a meditation on how space curves around a massive object. But you particularly mentioned the copper, and that is because copper is a really important material in quantum technology. And a lot of the experiments in Silke's lab use copper to cool down to temperatures just above absolute zero. And in order to do that, copper is the ultimate material. So a lot of our future technologies will rely on that material. However, it was important to them to also make the audience aware of the harmful implications of copper mining. In one part of the exhibition, you see these copper tapes with writing on them, where they make us aware of the social and environmental implications of often vulnerable people that are being displaced because a new mine is built. This especially is impacting the peoples in South America. And this, again, to cycle back, is not something that the science paper will do. They cannot, or often do not, focus on the entirety of what innovation brings with it, and the positives, of course, and the negatives. The combination of art and science can bring you a bigger picture of what it means.
The next question I wanted to explore a little bit about the question of perspective, literally perspective, but also perspective from an audience perspective. Studio Above and Below is the name of this artistic project, and they have got a virtual reality piece that helps us visualise quantum concepts such as probability, tunnelling and entanglement, and they create through their virtual reality physically ambiguous space that is there, but not one that we can detect through our own sort of human senses. And from our art history perspective, that's in stark contrast to, for example, how the introduction of linear perspective and the utilisation of mathematics in the Renaissance provided the viewer for the first time with a singular perspective. There was a lot of excitement about the use of virtual reality in the lecture that I went to. How do you think this artistic approach might be giving people a slightly different insight into the world and a different insight into perspective in the way that linear perspective might have done in the past?
Yeah, I think you highlighted something important for us, and that is the personal experience. So we're moving towards an artwork that requires the audience member to immerse themselves and to experience. Virtual reality or mixed reality is a wonderful tool to really experience the thing that is inherently experiential. We gave the artists, an artist duo that operate under the name Studio Above and Below, this sheer impossible task to help us experience the quantum world. So something that operates at a subatomic particle level that is just underlying all of our principles in the universe. The immersive technologies, like virtual reality, are exceptional tools to achieve this. It has the ability to instantly create an intimate environment that you can interact with. And in this case, the artists were really keen to use this latest of headsets, the Apple Vision Pro, which has this nearly human eye vision resolution. It really looks real. And it can literally be anything. It's the artist's creativity that fills that space. This particular work is mixed reality, so you still see the actual room you're in. It's not as disorienting as other virtual reality pieces. It's a one person at a time kind of introversion, introspection experience where they're providing, after some introduction, 3 chapters that you can engage with and feel your way through the quantum weirdness. This is achieved by sound, by these design elements, by their visual language, very flowing movements. You have free hands to interact with what you see and hear. So that is playful, and we really wanted the people to play and engage with this world that they otherwise will never be able to go to. Play and deep play is something researched in art and design and in philosophy as well. It gives you agency to decide what to do next. In our quantum lens, you can tunnel through obstacles that in our classical understanding you wouldn't be able to, so it kind of messes with you. So the feedback that we get for those that like playing and like experiencing is very positive. From an outside, you can see two kinds of audiences. Some just stand there with a smile and look in awe and wonder, and others are really digging in and crawling through and laughing. I think many of the audience members, it might be the first time where they put on virtual reality headsets. We always have one person dedicated to supporting that experience and any glitches that occur, because it is a new technology, is at the edge of what we can do right now. The aesthetics of it and the direction is given by the artists, and they worked in collaboration with the Virtual and Immersive Production Studio, which is an entity here from the Faculty of Arts in the University of Nottingham. So it is a studio directed towards creative production and creative industries, has a lot of the latest technologies. It researches both the use and development of these technologies and supports the creatives in their experimentation and prototyping, because this really is a field that's just pushing at what we are at the moment.
The last question, I think it's digging into that question around metaphor again, which I thought was a very successful aspect of the exhibition. It had been very much something that seemed to strike people, both scientists and also artists, in Monica and Daniela's piece, where they laid bare the amount of poetic language used by scientists unbeknown to themselves in theoretical works. I'd bring the conversation to a close by returning to the question of the Titans, in the case of the Greek and Roman, rather than cosmological. I was struck by things I'd read around where there is the sort of collaboration around art and science that tends to err on the side of emphasising our smallness in relation to this massive world we're surrounded by, and also more emphasis around our destructiveness. And I think there's a lot of focus on ethics. And Conrad Shawcross alludes to the perils of man in his Ringdown, where I saw that he referred to W.B. Yeats's poem Second Coming in the way that he's got those rotating spheres in his piece Ringdown. And the poem starts off saying, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. And the poem concludes, written in that post-First World War era, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. But in Prometheus, the playwright Aeschylus, his Prometheus was a personification of all that's unique and special about man, what makes him different from every other object in the world, being endowed with reason. He can see, he can build, mine, anticipate, interpret, invent, create language and the arts. Prometheus is like this personification of what gives man talents to both survive in the world, which is so hostile, but also to make the earth beautiful with these capacities that he's endowed with. To have survived in such a hostile world with all its potent and dangerous forces, it seems no small miracle that we've actually survived in this enormous cosmos, that we've built a home for ourselves. So I was wondering, in the battle between Zeus and Prometheus, what side do you think artists are currently falling on? Is there a worry that they're taking sides of seeing man as full of hubris, needing to be kept in check, chained to the side of the Caucasus Mountains forever? Or do you think there is something more optimistic or hopeful in the exhibition?
Yeah, that's opening us wide now. I think historically both artists and scientists have often identified with Prometheus, the bringer of knowledge, who defies the gods as empower of humanity. Science seeks to uncover the secrets of the universe, right? Well, art challenges the perceptions and the social norms. But both fields thrive this curiosity. It's this struggle between control and rebellion. I don't think we can really put one into one box and the other in the other box. It's always the authority and progress, punishment and innovation. Both thrive in the friction and the disruption as well, and the desire to push the boundary. But obviously there are tensions, and we talked a little bit about them. So are they still stealing the fire, pushing against the limits of these sets of institutions, the traditions, the ethical concerns? I think that's a lot of my work, which tries to change the way we research and open it up again. This is a lot to do with funding and publishing and the way that we have to follow principles. It has to do with controlling access to knowledge, maintaining power structures. So that's maybe more where both art and science are under the big Zeus power. But the fear that you raised that scientists and artists might side with Zeus, and that to me suggests a limitation that we're definitely working against here. If we're limited by that, we stop or hesitate to challenge these structures and the authorities. We're just submitting then to, it's always been that way, and this is how the structures work. What we are working towards here in the ARTlab, and a lot of my own work, is change of the culture. And many others do that too. If creativity and discovery become too cautious, too self-regulating, then we risk losing this Prometheus spark that we need to create knowledge together. But then, of course, there's the punishment of Prometheus, the chain, and the bird of hunger for knowledge, for freedom, for progress. Many artists and scientists experience this. Which side are they on? I'd say likely Prometheus, but there is this risk of becoming Zeus. I think the battle is still out.
What's next for you?
Well, first, the life of the exhibition Beyond Nottingham is that it will tour. So it's going to London next to the Science Gallery, which is really exciting. And then hopefully onwards, we're in conversation with other places. The aim is to tour that for several years. So the research, the collaborations, the relationships, the new ideas that have been developed along the way. We have a whole archive now of new ideas. They are all being published and worked on. The residencies will be part of that. The ARTlab will have its next round of residencies. It is our living lab, so we are improving every time. It's a long-term goal, a long-term horizon. It's an experimental place. We have to be open to both what works and what doesn't and learn from them. Very importantly, make visible the successes. I think Cosmic Titans is one of those moments where we made visible the successes. I'm so happy the audiences like it, that they can engage with it, that they take something very personal from it and enrich their own lives through that as well.
Thanks for listening to Arts First. You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes at our Substack website, and you can find that at artsfirst.uk, or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on our YouTube channel. Please give us a like or review us on any of those channels. That would be a great help. If you'd like to help with donations, then please see our Substack donations page. We'll see you next time.